That's where he learned his politics.
Yeah.
In the school of Vince McMahon.
It's like they are borrowing from the world of wrestling.
They did it at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. It was like,
it looks like a fucking wrestling match.
Got assassinated, and they're doing a wrestling show. And then it says in the document, in no uncertain terms, I'm quoting exactly, but there's a problem. The American people won't support this kind of expansion on the military and what it's going to cost because of the Vietnam syndrome. And how do we get over the Vietnam syndrome, this document says? Well, it's going to take another Pearl Harbor. It actually says we need another Pearl Harbor. And what happens around a year later? They get it. It's 9/11. In wrestling, heels turn to face, bad guys become good guys. But the other thing also happens. The good guys become bad guys. The faces become heels. And Trump better remember that. Because he may be a face, of course he's a heel to half the country, but he doesn't care about them. But the half of the country that he's a hero to, he's going to become the heel.
Dilemma Podcast, Jay Shapiro here. Right off the bat, I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon, my time, and this ceasefire in Gaza and Palestine has been announced just a few hours ago. Obviously something I've been speaking a lot about on my channel, so wanted to just acknowledge that I have obviously a lot of thoughts about it, a lot to say about it. I'm not a everyday uploader kind of YouTube follow the news kind of guy, so I hope you don't expect that from me. I'm more of a philosophy and broader scope psychological analysis kind of guy, essay, including this episode here. But I am speaking tomorrow with Ali Rizvi, who wrote The Atheist Muslim and has become a friend and is the one person in my film that I made with Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz, Islam and the Future of Tolerance, who I think has kind of stayed with me a bit on the analysis on a lot of this stuff. So we're talking tomorrow. That won't be live. I'll put it out early the next week. But I think we'll be speaking a lot more about that stuff and reacting to that stuff. Speaking of the kind of more live response to the world stuff, I have a membership program, and thank you to the members who have joined. And it's a way to support me. Obviously, this stuff takes a lot of sort of work, so I hugely appreciate it. But I wanted to do something more collaborative and give back and hear from you. So once a month, last Sunday of every month, 12 Eastern, I do a hangout, a live stream hangout, which I'm going to be doing on Zoom. So if you become a member and you find the link, you'll find the invite for the monthly Zoom hangout, and come join, ask me questions, meet each other. We could talk about things, certainly respond a little bit more to events live in the news, and that kind of stuff. We'll certainly be talking about what's in store. I think what's in store for Israel, what's in store for the world, if this will even hold, etc. Obviously, this morning I'm feeling a bit of relief and optimism that maybe the bombs will stop and the genocide will stop, but kind of let's not lose our focus. Let all eyes on the prize. But today I'm going to be speaking I'm speaking with Paul J, who, for those of you who did the homework and you watched the film that just ranks in my top 10 films of all time called Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows, is a documentary director and journalist from my world, and that film is incredible and is about professional wrestling. I'm about to talk a lot about professional wrestling. I have something written here, which might not be the kind of thing you would expect from a podcast that's about philosophy and psychology and that kind of analysis. But I'm here to try to convince you that it is an insanely important lens, an interesting lens, kind of a pop art history lens to understand certainly the American ethos, but maybe much more. And so we're gonna dive into that. I'm recording it in a room with boxes, really apropos of nothing other than it felt just kind of appropriate for this subject. So, professional wrestling, the WWF, as it was known when I was a kid, I think it's known as the WWE now, might actually be one of the best ways to understand American culture. It's kind of a pop art history, a mirror of the nation's psychology. It's like comic books or Marvel films, which I think you've seen me reference a lot. I love that stuff, although I wasn't the biggest wrestling fan growing up. I had friends who were, so I knew the names. But it reflects our fears, our moral stances, our national anxieties, our personal grievances. the characters in the ring become avatars, projections of the bosses we hate, the relatives we resent, the heroes we wish we were, or maybe the raw carnal impulses we try to hide. Someone like the Undertaker represents the inevitability of death, his entrance music and his whole persona. Mankind was a kind of wild character who represents almost sacrificial madness in life. There was the $1 Million Man. He was a character when I was a kid. Ted DiBiase, his character name was, who represented the smug, untouchable elite, the coastal billionaire who laughs at you as you suffer in the audience. Each character is an exaggerated reflection of someone in the American imagination. It's a morality play dressed in spandex and pyrotechnics, which how could you have anything better than that? And the geopolitics in the ring have always just been wild and this mirror reflection of America. There's this long tradition of patriotic, hardworking, kind of blue-collar heroes. These are the real Americans who never quit, who take their vitamins, say their prayers, and stand up for what's right. And they always end up facing off against, sneaky, slimy, or especially foreign villains in the ring who embody whatever threat America was currently fixated on. I'm thinking of when I was a very young kid of someone like Hacksaw Jim Dugan, or there's others. But of course, the most famous of all was Hulk Hogan when I was a kid. And he was the embodiment of America in the 80s, right? Including into the 90s. And Hulk Hogan is an avatar for America on the world stage. It's almost too perfect. His entrance music was real American. And he battled people like Andre the Giant, who obviously stood for this looming kind of unbeatable Eastern European menace from Russia, this giant, a metaphor for maybe communism itself, even though he was played by a Frenchman. And then in front of a roaring crowd at exactly the right time in history, Hulk Hogan body slams that giant, just a made-for-TV ending to the Cold War. Before that, Hogan fought people like the Iron Sheik, who was this cartoonish Iranian villain. He waved a flag here, pictured a flag that literally just said Iran, which I think is kind of hilarious, as if the audience wouldn't have recognized the real ones. Just put the word Iran, which may have been true. Later, he wrestled someone like Yokozuna, who was a supposed Japanese sumo wrestler, even though he was played by a Samoan guy. And that was during the 1990s kind of American panic about Japan's economic rise, particularly in the technology sector, maybe factories, and something that those populist audiences at wrestling matches felt threatened by. So the moral theater kind of only deepens from there. I'm going to give you a few characters that if you are interested, or if you have time to look into their sort of, comic book arcs, are really fascinating reflections about the American psyche. Someone like the Big Boss Man, who I remember as a kid, and he debuted as this sadistic Southern cop. He actually had a little Confederate flag on his shoulder. And he was a heel. A heel means a bad guy, right? You're supposed to hate the heels and love the faces. That's a term in wrestling, heels and faces. It's important to know. But the Big Boss Man was an authoritarian heel who his catchphrase was, "You're about to do hard time." And at first, the crowd booed him, right? They loved to hate this guy. They saw him as an enemy, the face of police brutality and overreach. But just a year later, the crowd began to cheer him, and suddenly this uniform became a symbol of sort of righteous justice again. And that shift from villain to hero, face to heel and back is really central to the psychology of wrestling and to America itself. And it's not always scripted or decided by the writers of the event itself. It's a reaction to what the audience is responding to. I think of a good way to think of this wrestling analogy that I'm certainly building is almost a huge focus group to see how people are responding to what, and then it's up to sort of the writers to decide what they're going to do with the character. Another character like Sergeant Slaughter, who was a bit earlier, was a Vietnam era drill sergeant type. Originally a good guy, just whistle and drill sergeant, just mindless. But during the Gulf War in the 90s, his character begins accusing these same fans who once adored him for being so patriotic as not being patriotic enough. They weren't patriotic in the right way. And then he turned heel by suddenly sympathizing with Iraq literally, in the Gulf War, his character. And so the audience then gets to channel their rage and nationalistic fervor, maybe fear, by watching him be humiliated in the ring. And I'll just sort of say right here, I think wrestling is often sort of grotesque in its racism and sexism. And so I acknowledge that and I see that, but I think it's also insanely revealing, this form of theater. Goldust, for instance, was this character a bit later who was designed to sort of provoke a homophobia in the crowd. There's people like the Ultimate Warrior, who, was basically a piece of testosterone come to life on stage. Earlier than that, I remember Rowdy Roddy Piper, who wore a kilt and was sort of Scottish, but I think at the time was embodying sort of a Northern Ireland wild man, even though, he was Scottish. It's all there. There's like the culture, the fear, the projection, the catharsis, in just this like crazy loud form. But there's one character from this world that I really want to talk about, and it's someone you definitely know. His name is Donald J. Trump. So to understand who the President of the United States really is, you can't just look at this man from Queens and his life. The President of the United States, I contend, is a character written for him, which he became in the WWF. So this is the arena where Donald learned to perform power, how to play a crowd, really got off on it, obviously, how to win through spectacle. I think this relates to the Gaza stuff that I mentioned in the pre-open, honestly. His history with wrestling goes back to the 80s. It was the mid or late 80s where he hosted WrestleMania 4 and 5 at his Atlantic City casino. He knew Vince McMahon and his wife, Linda, who I will remind you later became the head of the Small Business Association or Administration and is now currently the Secretary of Education for the country of America. But Trump wasn't just a fan. He didn't remain just a fan. He actually stepped into the ring himself twice in two really important storylines that I'm going to give you. And those two storylines will tell you everything you need to know, I think, about how he became the man who won 2 presidential elections. So the first one, it's the year 2007, and his apprentice character and show is also getting quite large. This was a storyline called The Battle of the Billionaires. So it was 2007, and he becomes a character. So the storyline begins on Monday Night Raw. This was their show in January, and Vince McMahon is giving an over-the-top fan appreciation night. So Vince McMahon, the real owner of the WWF, plays this character as this swaggery boss who you kind of love to hate, right? Everyone in that audience can pour all of their frustrations of their real boss or whoever it is that they hate into Vince McMahon, who's obsessed with himself. So on Fan Appreciation Night, for example, he invites a fan up and reveals a prize to her, which is a picture of himself on a cover. Anyway, he's giving this big performance, and then Donald Trump interrupts him on the screen, tells him what a terrible job he's doing and how he doesn't really know how to appreciate his fans, and then literally starts raining down $100 bills fluttering through the air into the crowd. Brought to you by Donald Trump, right? The crowd goes wild, and Vince is furious that, the peons, these working class losers in the audience are getting rewarded and getting someone who actually loves them, right? So it's 2 egomaniacs in a fight with each other about who really controls and understands the crowd, and each promises to humiliate each other on the stage. And so the storyline goes on. It was ridiculous, right? So each billionaire gets to choose a wrestler to represent them at WrestleMania 23, and the losing billionaire gets his head shaved right then and there in front of everybody. And so anyway, Vince chooses a wrestler named Umaga, who's a Samoan monstrous wrestler, foreign, right? And Trump picks Bobby Lashley, who at the time was a rising star, young, muscular, clean-cut, a little bit of an all-American hero figure. And then, this is important, I'm going to mark this for the people who are really into the story I'm telling now. To make sure it all goes down fairly, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who's a name you might remember, he's still around, of course, is named the special referee. And this is important when they're both up there, the 2 billionaires having this feud. Stone Cold Steve Austin gets in the face of both of them, kind of to remind them who's really boss here. Like, you think you control the crowd, but don't forget, I'm the referee and I'm not scared of either of you two. Anyway, it was sort of ridiculous. They have the big bout. Trump's figure wins, and he gets to shave Vince McMahon's head, which he did along with his wrestler in front of everyone. Stone Cold Steve Austin gets a kick out of the whole thing. But remember, after it's all done of this spectacle, the arrogant boss gets humiliated by this billionaire, playing a billionaire at the time. He wasn't actually one yet. Now he's become the billionaire he played. Stone Cold Steve Austin gives Donald Trump a stunner, which was like his body slam move or whatever, which knocks him out on flat, and the audience roars, which is like this little reminder at the end of like, okay, let's remember sort of still what the audience power can do. So I'll get to Stone Cold Steve Austin in a second. But the next storyline, it was 2 years later in 2009, I think is even more important. So 2 years later, the storyline returns, and the storyline is basically that Vince McMahon is playing his boss and the character that he's in financial trouble, that they're really threatened by a lot of things going on and he needs to figure something out. And Donald Trump, again, appears on the screen and announces that he's bought the WWF or WWE, I think it was known at the time, to save the company, to bring the company back to life. And it was his first move then as this pure populist theater, right? I'm the new owner and I'm going to change things around here, right? Sounds like his presidency. So he declares that the next week's episode is going to be commercial free and live, and that anyone who had bought a ticket to the actual event would get a full refund, because obviously it's live and everyone can just watch it then. And the crowd explodes, right? Trump promised to give the people what Vince never would, right? What they really wanted, to be listened to and get this thing that they, get attention. And in a way, like, this whole theater thing kind of worked a little bit too well. The fake announcement was so convincing that WWE's real stock price actually dropped 7 points overnight. Because investors really believed that Trump had bought the company. Wasn't true. So a week later, McMahon returns and he's furious. The storyline goes on for about a week where Trump's in charge and Vince is humiliated and moved to the janitor's closet, and they did all these kinds of things. Trump gets kind of bored with the whole thing and agrees to sell the company back to Vince. And they do a negotiation. They do an art of the deal performance in front of everybody where Trump gets to show off his chops, and he'll sell it back, but only at, double the price or triple the price or whatever it was. And Vince gets his thing back, and, Trump gets to walk off with this fictional profit, right? And walk away into the sunset triumphant, and the audience, everything sort of returns back to its stasis, but the audience remembers that Donald Trump saved us and he could do it again at any time. So I think in both storylines, Trump, wasn't just performing a wrestling character. He was really learning from it, the whole spectacle, the whole theater. He learned how to craft enemies, how to control attention, how to make every outrage just part of the show. And when he finally stepped into real politics, he didn't need to change the act at all. He just changed the set. This, if you remember, is his entrance at the RNC in 2016. The spectacle of politics, this dance between a scripted story, a reality of real egos vying for who gets to be, in the center of the stage and who gets to win, with real things at stake. Because while it's scripted, if you become the champion of the WWF, you certainly are worth a lot more money. There's real things at stake. Or the worst villain, it's worth a lot of money. But it's constantly in conversation, live conversation, with how the audience will react, right? The writers don't always know who the audience will love or hate or begin to love or begin to hate. And that's what's really important here, because I mentioned Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stone Cold Steve Austin is a fascinating character who interplays with the particular film that I'm going to be talking about that Paul J. directed, which was about Bret Hart. Stone Cold Steve Austin was written as a total heel, right? This kind of like jerky guy who literally, and people might remember the shirt, Austin 316, has his first coming out with a one-to-one argument and fight with Jake the Snake Roberts, who at the time is playing a born-again Christian who's quoting scripture and all this kind of stuff. And Austin says, kind of F that, I'm really the guy, Austin 316, which is a reference to John 3:16 from the Bible.
You sit there and you thump your Bible and you say your prayers and it didn't get you anywhere. Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says I just whipped your ass.
Come on, that's not necessary.
I mean, it's kind of wild that you would come up with a character who's meant to be a villain, who's sacrilegious, who's sort of like spitting on the Bible in this kind of way. But you know what? The audience kind of loved this guy, right? And this is the backdrop of what you do when you're writing these characters, and that's the audience reaction. They love this guy. They start buying his t-shirts. The Austin 316 t-shirt became the biggest selling t-shirt since, and it surpassed, the Hulkamania of the 80s. And what this all reflects at the time, especially in the 90s, I think, is a disillusionment, a disenchantment with that Reagan era style, eat your Wheaties, take your vitamins, stay in school, thumbs up hero. The audience starts to think that rings so hollow. It's not true. It's not cool. Maybe they realize America isn't really like that. And this Austin guy, there's something about what he's doing, maybe the cynicism, maybe the anger. That's really what this is about. And even Hulk Hogan himself, the hero of America and the American hero of the 80s and into the early 90s, turns into a heel and a bad guy and joins this thing called the NWO, the New World Order. I mean, you can't get better than the analogies of what's happening in the ring as to what's happening, I think, in the psyche of America there. And then, so that's Stone Cold Steve Austin, who's this anti-hero who the audience just can't get enough of and loves, right? He flips off the audience. He says no to authority. He's an anti-establishment figure at every step of the way. And I think this is a sort of a psychological hope and prediction. I hope that ethos of Stone Cold Steve Austin as an anti-establishment, dude who doesn't give an F and will take you down, even Donald Trump, even, anybody. I hope that ethos is still out there in the American psyche and is ready to jump back in the conversation. So the Bret Hart character, and that's what this film is about. Bret Hart was another kind of Hulk Hogan-esque character, a really good guy. He's a family guy, and this is a true story. The Hart family, it's his real last name, is a wrestling family. They're all involved in it. They're kind of legends of this entertainment sport. And he stands up for what's right. He stands up for what's good. He's safe for your kids. Kids like to root for him. He's just a hardworking, good guy. He's also a Canadian. And he was always supposed to be this hero of WWF. But again, the audience starts to get maybe a little bored with him, starts rooting for the bad guy. And what do? As Vince McMahon or whatever it is, if you're writing this, when the audience and maybe the country starts to root for the bad guy. And I'll kind of leave that there because I do want you to watch the film, Paul J's film. I'm going to link to it again. It's available through his site and elsewhere. Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows. It exposes a lot of the conversations that I've brought up now of the American psyche, of nationalism, of patriotism in a massively important moment in the 90s, pre 9/11, when maybe everything really started to break. And I will end my sort of love fest for the analogy of wrestling, but you're going to hear now a conversation between myself and Paul J, who's more than just a director. He's also a journalist and has a lot of really interesting analysis. And so we get into a lot of topics beyond just the wrestling metaphor, which obviously I like, and I just try to keep pushing. One little note before I get into it. I'm sure I'll talk more about this with Ali and maybe in the live stream. there may be a ceasefire now, and we might be in a new phase of the conversation of what's happening in Gaza, but the world has changed in a massive way. And people may have heard me say this before, that I think at some point, when the energy of the Occupy Wall Street kids, which I think is back in a sort of Gen Z protest way that's brewing in the world, and this type of Stone Cold Austin-ish rebellion that is Trumpism, but shouldn't be so devoted to Trump. Remember that Stone Cold gave Trump a stunner. When we find each other, the Occupy kids, and maybe some of this is happening with Candace, whatever, I'm sure you're seeing Max Blumenthal and others go on these podcasts with people like Matt Gaetz and whatever. Like there's a conversation happening here in the arena that I hope continues to brew and continues to go bigger. That's just my only hope. If there's any sort of wrestling Trump fans out there, remember that heels turn to faces, faces turn back to heels, and you, the audience, have more power than you think to decide who gets to go where, and decide sort of who gets to be the hero. So I'm going to let this play with Paul J. Thank you for indulging my wrestling analogy. All right, here you go.
Well, I think what I take from it is that's where he learned his politics.
Yeah.
In the school of Vince McMahon. He was a real estate guy. He was famous as a real estate guy, but he didn't have any kind of mass following. First time as I know anyway, that he gets in front of a crowd of thousands, 20, 30,000 people at a wrestling show, and apparently as many as 1 billion people around the world was watching World Wrestling every week. He is taught how to get the crowd to pop. And so wrestling in reality operates on 2 levels. As you know, there's the theater in the ring, but you're supposed to suspend disbelief and believe what's going on in the ring is real.
Yeah.
And prior to our film Wrestling with Shadows, in fact, apparently the majority of people kind of thought it was real. But behind the scenes, there's a real battle goes on. And that's between individual wrestlers vying for a higher positioning in the hierarchy, in the script writing. And of course, the highest of the hierarchy is you get to be the number 1 face, good guy, or the number 1 heel, bad guy. And the reward is you get the World Wrestling Championship for a few months or however long they decide works. So on a lot of levels, it's like American politics, first of all. The theater of what goes on in Congress it's not just all theater in the sense that they're also trying to get the crowd to pop. You got to learn how to do stuff that's popular, and the real power behind the scenes, the Vince McMahons, is what Sanders calls the billionaire class. But you don't talk about them in Congress, and you don't talk about them hardly ever on television news. It's only recently some of them have been sticking their nose directly into the theater, like Musk. Primarily, a few of the others, Karp from Palantir gets interviewed a lot, but I don't think so much to a mainstream audience. I guess Musk probably more than anybody is the one that joined the troupe, the theatrical troupe. But there's real stuff going on. So on the one hand, they're playing to an audience and saying stuff that resonates, and people suspend disbelief with these political characters the way they have learned to do with wrestling. Now, it's not just wrestling. The truth is the whole political culture is about suspended disbelief. And lie after lie after lie gets forgotten or forgiven. Take the Iraq War and getting, totally lied into a war that killed, perhaps as many as 1 million Iraqis and a few thousand Americans. And it goes on. I should say, you can go back to the Vietnam War, which killed perhaps as many as 3 million people and over 50,000 Americans, and completely based on lies. As we know from the Pentagon Papers released by Dan Ellsberg, they were very conscious that the Gulf of Tonkin incident that started the Vietnam War was BS, and that they knew they couldn't win, and so on. The fundamental underlying piece of this, and it's not disconnected from wrestling, is the whole Cold War mentality, the whole promotion of they're out to get us. And if you go back into wrestling in the 50s and the 60s, who are the bad guys? It's some Soviet guy with a Soviet flag, and then it's a Russian flag, and then it's a crazy Arab, and then it's some Chinese. So you look, as an audience, it plays on this thing that we've been taught right from the beginning, to deny our real world and believe in this fictional narrative that's called American politics.
Yeah.
Even though, even when you see some of its BS, you still believe, what's happening now is they can see through the corporate Democrat fiction, some of the people, but they've turned to a even, bigger fiction, which is the Trumpian version of things.
Yeah.
Which portrays itself as the new face, the new good guy, the new anti-elite guy, and you just suspend what's in front of your eyes, that Trump is surrounded by billionaires. I mean, they are the elite. As a skill set, Trump learned that there's a section of the population that likes narcissistic, over-the-top, big characters, whether it's Liberace or Elvis Presley, variations on Hulk Hogan, obviously. He learned from wrestling how to play this on the edge, almost madman, big character. And it's very interesting. After the election, most recent election, he did some interviews with mainstream media, and he was out of character. He actually talked coherently. He made some interesting points. They were trying to the journalists were trying to poke holes in his arguments, and he fended them off quite well. So the real Trump is not this bravado character. He's a much more calculating figure.
Yeah. And then just to underline the interest, the interplay of wrestling works on so many levels, like you said, because it's partially scripted, but they're responding to live audiences, and they're never quite sure, which this of course was the context and the background of your film about Bret Hart. That setting in politics is kind of everything, right? I mean, just to further the analogy of a politician getting on stage, and I'll show them clips right here or whatever, of the entry of Donald Trump when he wins the inauguration and stuff. It looks like wrestling openings. There's pyrotechnics.
Thank you very much. We're going to win. We're going to win so big. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. and Trump and music, it's like they are borrowing from
the
They
world
did
of
it at
wrestling.
They did it at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. It was like,
It looks like a
but
fucking
the guy
wrestling
just got
match.
assassinated, and they're doing a wrestling show.
It's just all theater. And then, so to back this up a little philosophically, I just want to make one point about technology here. And of course, this conversation is going to get off wrestling. We're going to go into your work on nuclear stuff. But I think this thing about politics as theater is so important to stay on, is that when people start, and I don't know if you've heard this on your tours with nuclear stuff or technology, when people start always giving this line and retort when we worry about new technologies, it's like, oh, everyone always worries about new technologies. They said the bicycle would end civilization and this or that or whatever. And I always think it's such a ridiculous retort. And I always go to the TV one, where if it was like, imagine if the day that the television started getting popular and started being a threat to radio, I got on some radio show as some talking head and I said, guys, I think this is a big problem for society. It's not going to like end the world, but what if I told you that in the future, people running for president in this country are going to have to put on makeup and stand on boxes to look a little taller and learn how to speak in like 30-second sound bites before these commercials try to sell things to them. And I worry this is going to distort the American enterprise so much, and we're going to end up with these crazy candidates. People would have said, you're insane, this little stupid TV thing. And like, that's actually what happened. And so I think just to like...
I'll add one caveat.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said, but Mussolini and Hitler came to power without television.
Yeah. But they would have used it maybe precisely in the way. Yeah, like fascism's not new, but they would have used it in this type of way. And then I don't know if you, because I don't remember the storyline as well, maybe as you do. Do you know the Battle of the Millionaires storyline, just to give to my audience, when Trump stepped in?
What I remember of it is it's Trump versus Vince McMahon. They each get to pick a hero to fight for them. Yeah. And whoever's hero wins, one gets to cut the hair off the other. So Trump gets to cut off McMahon's hair. And then at one point, and I think they even had Trump drop McMahon to the ground once.
And he takes, there's money. I might remember it a little better than you. Maybe I can give it, but it's just this perfect analogy for the American viewer to be like, I am your vessel, right? I am your political vessel to kick your boss's butt. Everything's going to return back to normal, but you're going to remember that I could come, do this at any time. And he was raining literally $100 bills down from the ceiling in one of the shows. It was Vince's money, real money that people were grabbing. It was almost the perfect. I think that's really where he learned his politics. But maybe I've just answered for you. If there's anything else to say about wrestling and Donald Trump,
I would just say that behind the scenes, Vince McMahon's wife, what's her name, Linda McMahon, actually winds up in Trump's cabinet.
Yes.
So they're very conscious of how to write these scripts, how to play these characters, and then applied it to politics. I mean, it's not the first time. Yeah. This kind of narcissistic, big over-the-top personality has succeeded in American politics, but the television production of it that they learned in wrestling, that's, I guess, a kind of new development, and they play it to a T. But I guess the underlying thing I'm trying to get at, though, is that the American identity itself that's been created, and many people still believe themselves to be this, is essentially an identity based on a fabric of lies. Yeah. And I mean, from the beginning, you can have a constitution about all men are equal and pursuit of happiness, while the same people that write it own slaves. Like, how do you get your head around all people are equal and pursuing happiness, and you own slaves? Like, this is a kind of suspended disbelief. Yeah. And the suspended disbelief goes, we're going to tame the savage heathen by opening up the West in the name of God. We're going to spread Christianity and civilization and so on by waging genocide and stealing the land of indigenous peoples. So how do you get your head around that? That's another piece of suspended disbelief hammered into people by cowboy movie after cowboy movie. Yeah. And of course, then that same kind of identity, which is America always fights for freedom, gets hammered in your heads, and you believe that America does some bad things, but for good reasons.
Yeah.
Everybody else does bad things for bad reasons, but we we do bad things, but we do it for good reasons. And I love how this kind of culminates in the connection with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Where you have at the end of Dr. Strangelove. And if you haven't seen that, you got to see that. Frankly, I'd make sure you'd see that even before my film, but you got to see. I can't believe how many younger people haven't seen the best political satire in the history of the universe. Anyway, at the end of the film, the pilot is riding a nuclear bomb down to Moscow, waving his cowboy hat. It's like the perfect merging of this artificial identity of what it is to be an American and what it's actually can lead to.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Yeah, well, let's start bringing it from Trump, the character. But I think there is a perfect bridge there because, again, you caught lightning in a bottle with Wrestling with Shadows. And that lightning in a bottle was not just bred as a great character and a compelling main figure. It was the context of the country starting to maybe not buy it anymore. And I don't know if this was conscious, right? This is just sort of happening in the crowd live, where Vince is like, people are tired of seeing the hero rescue the damsel on the tracks. They're tired of this American story.
They're tired of people saying, "Eat your vegetables" or something.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. It just starts. It's like the John Wayne American kind of story, the cowboy story. Even the Hulk Hogan character ends up turning bad, right? Into the NWO, which is literally the New World Order. They wear black. I remember kids in my high school used to show up with these NWO shirts. His goatee was suddenly black, and everyone was tired of the Bret Hart character of just this good guy. And I think underneath some of that must have been a kind of wayward 90s of the stories are just wreaking hollow, right? Like the Cold War's over and America wins, but all we have now is shopping malls and kind of a hollow existence. And I can't just keep telling myself the story. And I might have this sense that the history books are full of lies anyway, or I've overlooked kind of genocide after genocide, even on my own soil. And maybe that was what was happening in the background of what you filmed, of like this good American story in the world, Captain America, Superman, isn't working anymore. Maybe we're going to turn to something darker. And Donald Trump didn't care. He was just going to go wherever the audience was going to go, and he learned how to take that. So why don't you then take everything you just said, and we'll start bringing it out of the wrestling analogy a little bit and into the real world of sort of, maybe 9/11 is the place to go, where if you ask me if a historian in the future writes the story of American decline in a history book, chapter 1 will be September 11, 2001 as this moment of maybe the start of the decline. So I don't know if you want to take your Trumpian, I think a Trumpian film that explains it out of wrestling to 2001.
Yeah, I would say the disillusionment is before 9/11.
Yeah.
The 1950s, Ronald Reagan as the cowboy hero and America the good and all the rest. To a large extent, it's the Vietnam War that ends
right.
that. And tens of thousands of people in the streets protesting the war, the killing of 4 kids at Kent State that are protesting, the assassination of African American activists, and so on and so on. The Vietnam War was an end to what I would actually call, we're just doing some work on this for this nuclear film, the what I would call the Council on Foreign Relations vision of the world, which is the Rockefellers and a very bipartisan, both parties were in on creating the Soviet Union as an existential threat that the Americans have to rally around, building up the military, building up the nuclear force, because they're coming to get us. And the 1950s into the 60s are all about starting to reject that because of the Vietnam War. Everything starts to get questioned. And this is, my film features Dan Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. which was a very big moment in exposing the lies of the Vietnam War, because the Pentagon Papers showed that the Pentagon knew they could never win the war, but and fought it anyway because they just wanted to send a message, and the message was, the real message was, even though the propaganda message was, we're fighting Soviet expansionism, except they failed to tell anybody there weren't any Soviet troops in Vietnam.
Yeah.
We're fighting Chinese expansionism. Well, there's no Chinese troops in Vietnam. What they were fighting were the national liberation movements, who were fighting for independence, many of them also fighting for socialism. But Vietnam, everybody that knew anything at the time, the Vietnamese national liberation movement was not some puppet of the Soviet Union or China. It was a very independent national liberation movement. And they wanted to crush that, because what was the prime directive coming out of World War II? An American-dominated world outside of the Soviet Union and then China. But nobody else, no other country can leave the sphere of influence, of power of the United States. And it had nothing really to do even with socialist or communist ideology, even though they portrayed it that way. You know, in 1953, the British and the Americans organized a coup against Mossadegh in Iran because he wants to nationalize the Iranian oil company. Nothing to do with socialism or communism, just an Iranian nationalist. They do the same thing in Guatemala on behalf of the United Fruit Company. So the Cold War was like, if we go back to wrestling, it was a big piece of theater, but Vietnam poked a big hole in the fabric of that theater, because not only did they fight against an indigenous national liberation movement fighting against oppression, but the Americans lost.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to lose, you know, in this wrestling story, one way or the other, the Americans don't lose. So it was an enormous blow to the whole American psyche, the American identity, and most importantly, it made it very difficult to mount another war.
Yeah.
And in this project for New American Century, which people should become familiar with, it's very important. It's all the neocons that came to power with Bush around, including Rumsfeld and Pearl and, of course, Cheney and so on. They had a document in late 1990s. In fact, I think it went public in the year 2000. It's called Modernizing America's Armed Forces. And they want to spend an unlimited amount of money on upgrading everything to assert what is now a unipolar world. There's only one superpower, says this document. And we better take advantage of this moment by having the most powerful, I should quote Trump from the other day. They didn't use the word lethal, but it's the same language. We need the most powerful military in the world to regain American dominance. And because now there's no Soviet Union, there's just one superpower, it's us. Now we want the world to be in our image. And then it says in the document, in no uncertain terms, I'm quoting exactly, but there's a problem. The American people won't support this kind of expansion on the military and what it's going to cost because of the Vietnam syndrome. And how do we get over the Vietnam syndrome, this document says? Well, it's going to take another Pearl Harbor. And I'm not making this up if you don't know this already.
Yeah.
It actually says we need another Pearl Harbor. And what happens around a year later, they get it. It's 9/11. That's their other Pearl Harbor. And then the other big recommendation in this document was they want to abrogate the anti-ballistic missile treaty, because they want to pick up what Reagan did with Star Wars. They want to militarize space, and they want to have an anti-ballistic missile system in space. And they use 9/11 as an excuse, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with ballistic missiles. Within 6-7 months of 9/11, Bush and his gang do abrogate the anti-ballistic missile treaty. And guess what? Who are the people talking exactly the same way? The Trump gang. And what are they doing? The Golden Dome.
Yeah.
It's been their dream from, at least from Reagan, established American military dominance in space. And most importantly, it's a complete boondoggle. It can't work, but it's going to cost, who knows, $1 trillion, $2 trillion. One of the guys from Space Force, one of the generals, says we need another Manhattan Project to develop the Golden Dome, and that's what they're planning. So the theater, the lies about patriotism, the lies about, Big Daddy Trump is going to protect you, or even the lies from the corporate Democrats, which a flip side of the same coin, have been using the underlying mythology and lies of the Cold War to not just perpetuate this massive military industrial complex, but to have a big modernization of the nuclear arsenal, even though they know very well how incredibly risky it is, especially now introducing artificial intelligence into nuclear command and control, which they're doing. I'm not saying making the decision-making AI, but making the analysis of the satellite and sensor data AI, which it can hallucinate, it can make mistakes. So there's not a single military or political leader that can claim the risk of miscalculation and error in nuclear war is zero. In fact, they all know it's far from zero. But instead of talking about that, they have this buffoon tip of a fascist spear, except he's not really a buffoon, he plays one. And we're heading towards a moment in time humans have never faced with climate, and the climate science denial is as bad, and nuclear. And we're talking about, idiocy, like should trans people be playing sports and things.
But so let's talk about then this new project you're working on, because it's based on, is it the book The Doomsday Machine by Ellsbury?
It's based on it, but we go a lot further. And I did about 40, 50 hours of interviews with Dan Ellsberg before he died.
Yeah.
Emma Thompson's going to be narrating, and we're interviewing all kinds of experts. But it's, I think it's a way to tell the story, linking some things that hasn't been done before, which is the relationship of the nuclear bomb to American identity. What does that mean? It means, you're born into a world that already exists. And from an early childhood, unless you're born into a very progressive family, and I mean very, because I think most families that vote Democrat share a different variation of the same mythology. But you're told, you're American, and we're fight for freedom, and we're the good guys, and the culture says all the same things to you, and that starts to become who you are. You think of, who am I? I would venture to say, I'm going to do this as a test, that if you actually asked people, who are you? You might get, I'm a New Yorker. You might get, I'm a Texan. It might be a city, it might be a state. You'll get, I'm an American. I don't think too many people would answer what the one thing that's actually really objectively true, and not just some social construct, which is, I'm a human. But how often does anybody say I'm a human and start who they are from there? Because if you start from I'm a human, then you start to see through all of the crap we've been fed. And why have we been fed it? Because that's how our society has developed. When we developed into class society, the rulers had to lie to the rulers. Why? To the ruled, I should say. Why? Because there's always more ruled than ruler. Quantitatively, and if they ever get organized, even in terms of force, the large number of the oppressed far outnumber the billionaires, if you want to go by today's terminology, the billionaires and multimillionaires. So they gotta keep people duped into thinking they're powerless, there's no alternative, only capital creates jobs. Well, except where's the capital come from? Like, nobody wants to ask some basic questions that are so damn obvious. Oh, we live in freedom, we're free Americans, except most of you go to work in dictatorships where the boss can fire you if you look the wrong way at them. 8 hours, 9 hours a day, most people work in what's essentially a dictatorship. Yet some of these same
Yeah.
people will go and fight to defend the American way of life and die for it. So this internalization of this identity is very connected, especially post World War II, with America's not just the greatest, it's the most powerful. And why? Because we got the bomb. And for a while, in the 50s up until the early 60s, the US was the only one really with the bomb. Certainly ICBMs, there's, lie after lie. In the film, we talk about the missile gap. Kennedy actually ran on it, telling the Americans, because he heard it from the Air Force, that the Soviets had 1,000 ICBMs and the Americans only had 40. And it turned out, and they knew it, it turned out that yes, the Americans had 40, but the Soviets had four working ICBMs, and it was even questionable if all four even worked. So a fabric of lies has created a very false American identity. So the film is going to be partly through Ellsberg's life, because Ellsberg was a true believer. He was a Marine. He worked for Rand Corporation as a nuclear war planner. He advised the Pentagon. He advised the White House. He had direct access to Kennedy. He advised at the very highest levels. And he was a militant Cold Warrior. Until, I guess, Vietnam, there were things that happened while he was working at Rand that started to shake his belief in the Cold War. And then the Vietnam War really shook him when he realized it was all based on BS and lies, and that it had nothing to do with freedom at all, or democracy. It had quite the opposite. It was trying to impose a dictatorship, a pro-American dictatorship on Vietnam. And then he releases the Pentagon Papers and his trial, and people don't know the story. The trial gets kicked because the Nixon administration, the same people that broke into the Watergate Hotel, broke into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. And when the judge heard about that, he dismissed the whole case against Ellsberg for releasing the Pentagon Papers. But it started to really radicalize Ellsberg. And then he realized the lying was a cover for systemic economic gain, geopolitical domination, and out-and-out profit-making by arms companies. So it really radicalized him. So the film's going to use him to tell that whole story. And then we're going to get into the current day, how the Cold War is still shaping today's world, exaggerating the Chinese threat, justifying even AI in nuclear weaponry. They justify it because, oh, well, if we don't do it, the Chinese are doing it anyway. So that it's the same old bloody story again. And the risks, as bad as they were in the past, are even higher now.
Yeah. If you could respond to the current moment we're in. I mean, if you've seen my show, I've been talking about Palestine pretty nonstop for 2 years now. But I keep wanting to make it something bigger and broaden the conversation around Palestine to anti-colonial conversations and the kind of world that you're in. And it certainly echoes everything we've talked about already of shattering the American story of democracy and we're the good guys. I think a ton of Americans and the world are certainly questioning that narrative when they see our behavior in the world. But I was recently, so, I know a lot of your work and I've watched a lot of your talks. I was in England at this conference, and this thing kept coming up where British people and I were in conversation a lot about the state of America, and I think they think we've all gone crazy with conspiracy theories. And I had to tell them, I was like, I think there's something really important to talk about here, and then I'm going to hand it back to you, is, the British Empire, there's not a lot of mystery around what it was. Like, it was a big, bad thing where they were trying to make everyone a subject of the world. You'll find people who are nostalgic for it in England. You'll find people who kind of like it. You'll find people who justify it, saying it was utilitarian good or Christianizing it. You find people who are ashamed of it, but they kind of know the deal that you get when you talk about the British Empire. But this American Empire, if we could call it that, the post-World War II kind of very short-lived, hyper-American, sort of unipolar effort is really an empire built on espionage and coups and secrets in such a profound way that I think is different, that really now is really being peeled back, right? Tucker Carlson's doing a series on 9/11 now. And 90% of the internet doesn't believe the Charlie Kirk narrative as being told by, COVID was certainly met with tons of skepticism. How, for someone like yourself who's been steeped so much in sort of trying to uncover and give information to Americans about really what has propped up this strange identity, are you excited in some ways about this current moment that so many people do seem to be questioning this sort of identity? Or, is this exciting or frightening or altogether the same, especially because it's a nuclear power that's having this conversation?
I can't answer it from the point of view of exciting or that, because it's not about how it makes me feel.
Fair enough.
And I'm so steeped every single day for the last 5 years in the possibility of nuclear war tonight.
Yeah.
That it's hard to answer from the point of view of feeling. So let me just answer more from a thinking point of view, okay?
Fair enough.
Well, I haven't seen, I think I don't know where he is in his 9/11 thing, but Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and that, who are saying things all of a sudden I can agree with about Gaza and AIPAC and such, but they're a variant of this rise of fascism. And I think those on the left that are celebrating either whether it's Tucker or Marjorie Taylor Greene, I saw on the Young Turks the other day, and they were fawning all over her. I mean, I have no problem with tactical alliances on these kinds of questions. And this goes way back, when the Americans were doing as horrible things in the Philippines in the 1890s as the British did. And by the way, let's be careful about the people. Most of Britain doesn't understand how bad the British Empire was. I saw an Indian historian say that over 300 years, the British Empire, directly and indirectly, meaning deliberately caused famines, may have killed more than 1 billion people. Prior to Hitler, that's fair. You can't be worse than the British Empire was. Although in the late 1800s and into the early 20th century, the U.S. was trying to catch up, but couldn't. It wasn't yet at a scale to do it. And then FDR was a break in that for a while. And that's a longer story. But the moment we're in, we need to navigate carefully. As much as the Trumpians themselves, who claim to be anti-elitists, are not, the Tucker Carlson variety now, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, we have to really analyze why they're taking these positions. The reason I went back, I didn't make my point. Mark Twain created, in alliance with some Tucker Carlson types of the day, libertarian isolationists, something called the Anti-Imperialist League. And that was to oppose U.S. imperialism in the Philippines and in Cuba and other places. I'm not against a tactical alliance of sorts on the issue of Gaza, because what's being done is a genocide, it's barbaric. And even if they're coming from the right, if they're saying things that are more or less true, okay, let's recognize it. But let's not create illusions about who these people are. These are the people that helped bring us Trump. I mean, when Trump was at the Republican convention, Carlson was in the front row with him. Carlson has been beside Trump all along. It may well be, and here's a bit of speculation, but I don't think it's completely groundless, that they're creating some political room on Trump's right because of the pressure from the Saudis and the Emirates and the big Gulf states. They have more money than Miriam Adelson has. And they are getting discredited. I mean, their non-response to the genocide in Gaza has been a blow to any credibility at all that they had amongst the Arab people. But they have drawn a line in the sand on the West Bank, the annexation of the West Bank, which is something, it was reported in the mainstream press that Trump promised Miriam Adelson in exchange for this $100 million, he would support the annexation of the West Bank. So it looks like the Arab leaders, the rich ones, have made it clear to Trump that that's a line he can't cross, and that he can't allow Israel to cross. And 2-3 days ago, he actually now has said, I won't let him annex West Bank. I won't let him do it. I mean, that's remarkable language to admit that you can order the Prime Minister of Israel what to do. Because if you have such power, why didn't you damn well order him not to kill 70,000 people in Gaza? So, but Trump says things perhaps he shouldn't say sometimes. So, but the Carlson Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm not doubting she kind of believes what she's saying. I don't know about Carlson, but I think there's a strategy here. And you know, I don't know where, I didn't see where Bannon is on this, but I think he's sympathetic to Taylor Greene. Yeah. I think there's a strategy here on the part of a section of the Christian nationalists that Netanyahu is screwing us up globally. It's screwing us up, especially with the rich Arab countries, which is very important economically to them. You know, Saudi Arabia wants to become the center of the world AI. All the other countries that are concerned about how much power it's going to take to power these enormous chip making and computer complexes to drive artificial general intelligence. He wants to become the center of the gaming now. They want to use their solar power. And so the Saudis are a very, very important, so are the other Emirates, but the Saudis particularly, extremely important to the future plans globally for the Silicon Valley people. Of course, the military industrial complex sells them shitloads of stuff, which is the way the Saudis pay tribute back to the Americans. It's more important than any particular Israeli government. And so there's a way they need to create some room for Trump on the right to separate from Netanyahu on the West Bank. It's too late to do it on Gaza, and the fact that the Arab countries didn't make such an issue out of Gaza made room for Trump to empower Netanyahu. But I think we're at a point now where the Arab countries are really afraid of a public opinion. The West Bank has become kind of the symbol of it. And I think they're saying enough is enough. So whatever they really believe, the Tuckers and Marjorie Taylor Greenes and whatever, the Christian nationalists, whatever they believe on this, I think it's more tactical than anything. And I also think it's still core to Christian nationalism, which is also Christian Zionism. So it's not like they're going to give up on this state of Israel as the nuclear and dominant power, although now that the Saudis just made a deal for Pakistani nuclear weapons, although that was always in the cards, it kind of pushes a little back on the Israeli nukes. But the so if what you're asking me is what do I think of the moment, yes. Well, first of all, I haven't seen what Tucker's doing on 9/11 yet, and so far
he's basically just throwing cold water on the commission.
Yeah, that's all.
As far as I've seen it, the 9/11 commission.
And as far as I know, once again they're ignoring what I did, because my work with Senator Bob Graham, I think, told the whole story, the real story. and nobody wants.
I don't know that. I don't know your work with that.
Oh, really? Oh, God.
Yeah,
Well, I can tell you quickly, and then people can.
yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Well, I interviewed Senator Bob Graham 6 or 7 times over 3 years. Graham was the chair when he was a senator, a chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was co-chair of the Joint Congressional Investigation into 9/11. Okay.
Oh, okay.
He is one of them. I believe he's died now recently, but he was one of the most important senators in the realm of American intelligence, a complete insider, former governor of Florida. Okay. He told me on camera, which I've published, that not only did Bush and Cheney know something was coming, not only did they work with the Saudis, and he said the Saudi government and king on knowing it was coming, but they, one, deliberately disorganized the American intelligence agencies by deprioritizing terrorism and telling intelligence agencies only to focus on big state players, demoting Richard Clarke, who under Clinton had been the anti-terrorism czar, and they demote him. And so now he has to report to Condoleezza Rice instead, and it's very significant because at the level he was at previously under Clinton, he could call his own meeting of the principals, which is undersecretaries, secretaries of agencies, heads of agencies. This all leads up to a critical point. And I said to Graham, well, what are examples? And I said, did it go beyond disorganizing agencies? He said it went into facilitating the attacks. And I said, okay, what's the examples? And one of the examples was that when this famous memo, and this memo was made public in the televised 9/11 hearings, and just to be clear, there's 2 different bodies here. There's the 9/11 Commission. That's the one that was televised. And that's the one Tucker's saying doesn't have credibility. And of course, I agree with him on that. We'll see if he actually gets to the true story or not. But even the guys that co-chaired that thing later said they missed all the important stuff. Anyway, the other one was the Joint Congressional Investigation led by Bob Graham, and nobody wants to talk about that one because of the conclusions Graham reached. Now, people should understand, when Graham's telling me this stuff, this is the guy who had a commission, millions of dollars to pay investigators for over a year. So this isn't just some crackpot senator coming up with stuff. This is the result. And this is, if people don't remember, the report of the Joint Congressional Committee is the one with the famous 28 pages that were redacted by the Bush administration. Finally, the 9/11 families that are suing the Saudis pressured Obama to release the 28 pages, and eventually he did, although it's still greatly redacted. But the 28 pages, I think, clearly showed a direct line to the Saudis. There's nothing in it about the role of Bush and Cheney. But Graham wanted there to be, and he couldn't get the rest of the commission to agree to put it in. But his example of facilitation was, he says, after the memo, bin Laden plans to attack America. And this is the one where Richard Clarke, when he's testifying at the commission, says our hair was on fire. There was so many examples of potential attacks coming. And then this memo comes in the context of all the signals we're getting of stuff happening. So the memo gets presented. Rice, the CIA gives it to Rice. Rice gives it to the White House, or maybe it goes directly to the White House, I think, because it's a presidential briefing. And what do they do with the briefing? Bin Laden plans to attack America. Well, they do nothing. Okay, we all knew that. What we didn't know, what Graham told me, is that in normal course of events, after a presidential briefing, there's something called the principals briefing. And in that, you send to the principals, like I said, heads of agencies, secretaries, undersecretaries, anything that might be relevant that they might have to take action. So you get a memo which says Bin Laden plans to attack America. Maybe you might take some action. Like the immigration department might pay attention. You might put NORAD on alert. You might do all kinds of things to thinking that. So Graham tells me it's not in the next principals briefing. He says on camera to me, someone has to decide to break protocol because it's impossible that you get a CIA briefing that says Bin Laden plans to attack America and it's not in the principals briefing the next day. Well, This is we get back to Richard Clark. See, Clark knew of the briefing, a CIA briefing. I don't know, but somehow he knew of it. But he couldn't call a principals meeting because he'd been demoted. And he goes to Rice, and she refuses. And he says this, he testifies about he couldn't call a principals briefing. I mean, I can go on about 9/11 for a long time. There's so many examples. I mean, very quickly, without getting into it, Thomas Drake, who was at the NSA and was a whistleblower who they tried to put in jail and this and that, he told me on camera that the NSA had the entire 9/11 plot in a telephone intercept prior to 9/11. Nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
There's other examples like that. So let me just say something about conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
There has never been a war without a conspiracy because war planning is done in secret. The whole idea of dismissing something as a conspiracy theory is the stupidest, nonsensical way to look at things. It's idiocy.
Yeah.
There are conspiracies that take place, and then there's conspiracies that are made up and are fictional and don't take place. But like the Pentagon Papers showed very clearly, the Gulf of Tonkin, it was a conspiracy. They knew the boat hadn't been blown up by the North Vietnamese, but they told everybody it was, and it becomes the excuse. What the hell is the lie about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq if that isn't a conspiracy?
Right.
I mean, the top echelons of the military and politics know there's no weapons there.
Yeah.
I mean, if there were weapons, would they have invaded?
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah,
they invaded because they knew there were no weapons. The UN was their canary in the mine for them. Once the UN inspectors concluded there's nothing here, now they say, oh, it's safe to invade. That's a conspiracy. So the whole thing is, 9/11 on the face of it. A bunch of people conspire to get on planes and fly them into buildings. That's a conspiracy. The whole thing is to tell people not to look at what are essentially a fabric of lies. They want people to look at the world as is reported in the mainstream press, which if you do, you won't understand a thing.
Well, this is so good, and then we could bring it back to wrestling somehow with a close, because I think that was all perfect. And it's, speaking of conspiracies and truth or whatever, I was having this discussion recently where there's concern about our information scape being so shattered that we no longer have a shared kind of reality, that we're all kind of living in our own stories, and we don't have some sort of grand narrative that we're all participating in together.
I think that theory is highly exaggerated. I don't think there ever was such a thing. I don't think the slaves ever had the same narrative.
Oh, but theirs didn't matter. Yeah, they weren't. That's right. But maybe just as far as people walking around not having this like shared reality or whatever, just in the hypothetical.
Yeah.
But in that statement, someone worrying about this, that we need to find each other again and find this kind of shared reality, there's nothing in that says it needs to be a true reality. And this brings it back to the wrestling thing of the suspension of disbelief, where it's almost, and this can sound conspiratorial, but it's almost that the scriptwriters of the American enterprise and the story we were all supposed to sort of, like you said, right back to, the Declaration of Independence is on page 1, all men are created equal, and on page 4, is a slave auction. That's real in the same paper. We're supposed to just suspend the disbelief and be like, okay, it's a good story we're telling. I'll go to the wrestling match and watch us fight it out, and I'll have fun. I'll enjoy this thing, and we'll all sort of benefit from it. The script writing of this thing got so bad and so sloppy that people just could no longer suspend their disbelief. Maybe for you, Vietnam, maybe for every generation, they have a big moment like this for Vietnam, and maybe for me, it's 9/11. And we have lost this whole thing. And the media, the mainstream media has no one to blame but themselves if they wanted to be the curators of this thing. And so it was a perfect answer of sort of, now here we are, where the wrestling match stepped out of the ring and into the world and said, this is all bullshit, and you either are just going to believe this or you aren't, but we're just going to keep on going.
I know you want to keep this wrestling thing going, and we're getting near the end. We can do more later, because I do want to pick up on the significance of 9/11. It is very important. I didn't want to diminish that point. Well,
no, yeah.
Well, how much
pick up on it?
Well, I'll do it quick, and then I'll give you your wrestling ending, and then if you want to do it again, we can. All right?
Yeah.
9/11 gave us something very, very important, and that's the Iraq War.
Right.
The Iraq War essentially, I mean, Vietnam too, but in our time frame, it ended any notion of international law. We now enter the era they're calling a rules-based order. They don't want to talk about the Nuremberg trials, where they put the Nazis on trial after World War II and concluded, so importantly, the highest crime against humanity are wars of aggression. That is the message of the Nuremberg trials. It is the underlying message of the founding of the United Nations. And the Iraq War clearly was a war of aggression. Everybody knows. The whole BS about weapons of mass destruction and Colin Powell's nonsense. Can you believe Colin Powell at the UN said there is a ring of ballistic missiles around Beirut with bacteria weapons aimed at Tel Aviv? Do you believe they would have invaded if that was true? I mean, it's nuts. It's beyond nuts. And he sits there in the UN and people are nodding their heads. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The Iraq War ended international law. It meant that you can wage a war of aggression. You did not get UN sanction from the Security Council. And surprisingly, some of the European countries actually stood up to it too. But what did it do? It gave us the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because this is what Putin's really saying. If you can invade Iraq to defend your sphere of influence in the Middle East, which is really what it was, to defend and expand the sphere of influence, then I can do it too. If international law doesn't apply to you, well, that doesn't apply to me. And so 9/11 gives us the end of international law as we know it, and what's called the rules-based order. And what's the rules-based order? It's not the Nuremberg trial conclusion. It's not the UN Charter. The rules-based order is what we say it is. It's the American
we get to
order,
write the rules.
it's American rules, and it's our rules or the highway. Okay, so let's quickly bring it up to, if you want to wage wars of aggression and you really want to assert American power, including confronting China, what do you need? You need an America where there is no room for an anti-war movement. You need an America where there's no room for the left. You want to crush progressive America. And they're saying so in no uncertain terms. And what happened the other day with Trump is saying to the military, we are going to consolidate our control in the country, so when we decide when we're ready to fight external enemies, we're not going to have domestic opposition. We're not going to be, Nixon and you're not 1969. We're not going to have, with millions of people in the streets. We're not going to have millions of people in the streets if we're waging war, wherever. Gaza is completely the consequence of the same thing. There's no international law. You can do anything you want. You can kill, you can wage genocide. And 9/11, Iraq War gives us the Russian invasion, and it gives us the Israeli genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza, because there's no longer any norms. What there is the American rules, and the American rules have a carve out. And the carve out is Israel, you can do whatever you want to the Palestinians. That's part of our rules. Except now, as I just said, maybe they're about to cross the line with the West Bank. All right, your final wrestling thing, okay? In wrestling, heels turn to face, bad guys become good guys, but the other thing also happens. The good guys become bad guys, the faces become heels. And Trump better remember that, because he may be a face, of course he's a heel to half the country, but he doesn't care about them. But the half of the country that he's a hero to, he's going to become the heel, because the economy is going to crash, people's economic life is going to get worse, and all his damn lies about making America great again are going to go poof. We'll just see if he's able to get the military on side, which is why that thing that happened 2 days ago is so significant. I should say a few days ago, who knows when this gets published. But it's so significant, because if he can get rid of military leaders who might say no to him, you're giving us unconstitutional legal orders. If he can get rid of those people and replace them with Christian nationalists, then even if his own MAGA base turns on him, he'll be able to occupy these cities and assert a straightforward police state. That's what he wants. I frankly don't think he's going to pull it off. And I don't think it even will be him. It will be Vance. I don't know how much longer Trump has, but it will be Vance and the cabal around Vance. Yeah. But I don't, if I had to guess, I think it's all going to fall apart on them. But that doesn't mean they're not going to make a very serious attempt to do it. And the answer from us is millions of people have to hit the streets. If they march into Chicago, all of Chicago has to hit the streets. Across the country, people should hit the streets in solidarity with Chicago, or whatever city if they want to go into Portland or whatever the hell it is. And people have to really vote. Vote for progressive candidates wherever you can. If you got somebody running, who's running not just against Trumpism, but also against American Democratic Party corporatism, you really got to get behind them. And even if you disagree with them on certain points, or you think the person didn't come out early enough on Gaza, whatever, forget it all. If they're in the realm of progressive, get behind them. And in other places, you might have to hold your nose and vote for a corporate Dem, but do it in a way without creating any illusions about who they are. Combined with in the streets and by the millions. And because imagine if the National Guard or the Army is in Chicago and they have 1 million people facing them. What the hell are they going to do? And they're going to start to question. We've seen this. We saw this when the Shah of Iran fell. We saw it when Marcos fell in the Philippines. They tried to crush the people's movement, and millions came out. And what happened? People deserted from the military. The military split. They didn't want to fire on their own people. So if they really push this, and the way he talked to the generals, they sure look like they're planning to. And they've already rehearsed it with what they've done in LA and in Washington, D.C. It's not like this is just talk. We got to get out in the millions. And so I don't think this thing wins, but it is going to be a battle.
Well, that was good. I'll leave it with that sort of inspiring speech. You probably wouldn't like my essay and video on filling out a blank ballot last time, but I will be on the street no matter what. but continue with my blank ballot. But that was great. And then I think thank you for bringing home the wrestling analogy for me. I think it.
Thank you for watching all of that. Thank you to Paul for indulging my wrestling analogy. I hope it helps. Hope it makes sense. The only thing that I want to say that I might disagree with Paul, and he's not the only one who says this, is when people suggest that Donald Trump is maybe smarter than he appears to be and is, playing a character. I just never buy it. I think Donald Trump is exactly as stupid as he appears to be. Or let me put it this way, exactly as thin as his character in the WWF was written. Right? That's it. I've never really had a problem trying to analyze or predict Donald Trump's behavior just through the lens of the character from WWF. It's just who he is. In fact, my wife can vouch for this. In the last few days, when the Gaza negotiations, were going on, and there was a lot of, I'm sure, anxiety of, is this real? Is this going to get to the finish line? Of course, we're not there. The moment, of course, I knew, it's absolutely going to get there, was the moment when I saw that El-Sisi in Egypt had offered an invitation of Donald Trump to come and do the signing ceremony, because that's the theater that he wants, right? His life is that character, Donald Trump, in WrestleMania, holding up the championship belt. That's what he wants, and everybody cheering for him in the audience. That championship belt is the Nobel Prize in his mind, and if he gets it, that's all he wants. So there was no way he was not going to be there, accept an invitation, sign a piece of paper, and hold it up and have the world cheer for him in his own mind. It was a brilliant move by Sisi, whatever we think of him. So next week, I'm talking to Ali Rizvi, as I mentioned in the open. Ali Rizvi is a really good friend. We're going to do an Islam on the Future of Tolerance revisited 10 years later. That's the film I made with Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz, and it's also the film where Ali Rizvi's in it at the very end, where I met Ali, I think, in person for the first time. That one's going to be a little bit more reacting to things like the road ahead for the world, because obviously I'm feeling a bit of relief if the bombs and the genocide is over at this phase. Obviously a long way to go to get to that word over, but entering the next phase of these conversations, which I think and hope involve deep conversations about Israel reimagining itself without Zionism, and huge conversations for the world, obviously huge conversations for America. There's a huge conversation to be had there. So we're going to get into a lot of that stuff, and it should be really fun. And then also, as I always say, if you've made it this far, especially in this one, you must be a fan. So go ahead and like and subscribe and share if you don't mind. And if you really want to join in, consider becoming a member, and it would be fun to meet you and hang out and hear your favorite wrestling, analogies. So that's it. This was a fun one, and I will see you soon.